The reason that Republicans are done with their race is that today, the last opponent to former President Trump, Nikki Haley, exited the race after besting every other candidate in this field and building her candidacy from something that initially sounded fairly vague, at times even meek, according to critics. She developed, over time, her message and her operation into the most enduring, credible, conservative case against the unpopular, indicted former president.
For a strong America, for a proud America, I am running for President of the United States of America. We have to face the fact that Trump is the most disliked politician in America. We can't win a general election that way. I said I wanted Americans to have their voices heard. I have done that. I have no regrets. It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that.
Those last lines from Haley came today. She landed some punches. She built a following. Now she leaves with that note of some kind of hopeful or resilient grace, if you want to call it that, but also no rush to announce her intentions or an endorsement. So that's the big news tonight. That's a contrast to basically all other top Republicans who clashed with Trump. His primary opponents that you may remember, they rushed to endorse. His sometime Senate foe, Mitch McConnell, also made news today by going through with it and publicly endorsing Trump as the presumptive nominee, a path that caps McConnell's retirement amidst what is an increasingly MAGA party, among the elites anyway. So what did Haley do in her campaign? Tonight seems like a fitting night to take a look because it matters for the future and this rematch race. So I'm going to go through a couple things. One, she broke a barrier that few of the D.C. pundits initially predicted. She drew the most votes of anyone other than the former president in their field. And a former president's like a quasi-incumbent. This was also, we should note, a field of men. And in a party fixated on so many so-called macho issues, their word, not mine, let's note tonight, Haley, now the first woman to win any Republican state primary ever. Pretty striking. Took until 2024 for that to happen. And thus, she is also the first woman of color to do so. Second, while several Republicans memorably ran as fairly predictable MAGA mini-me's, Haley demonstrated a pretty strong block of voters exist who oppose Trump. She exposed cracks in the support that he needs, that he has to fix if he has any hope of making up what was his 2020 deficit in this rematch to win in November. Now, there's no reliable way to predict elections. I've told you that before. That's just a fact. You got to wait and listen to the voters. But history also shows how often the D.C. pundits get it wrong, and they rarely admit it. They spent months talking up Haley's mostly male rivals, including especially Ron DeSantis. In other words, before the Republican voters ever spoke, we heard a lot about Ron DeSantis. And we also heard that Trump has a supposed stranglehold on Republican voters. Well, the only way to test that claim is to check in with Republican voters. And it turns out, even as those other candidates dropped, even as the headlines blared that Trump was going to be the inevitable nominee, and some of that proved to be the case yesterday, there was still a very large, underappreciated, often undercounted share of Republican primary voters who were against Trump. So we learned that over these 3 months, powered often by Haley. Last night, we had more people go out to the polls than any other day this year. So we'd be remiss here on the news if we didn't share with you some of that news, because Haley's campaign also showed breadth. Overall, now we can show you over a quarter of primary voters went for Haley in 11 different states. That's sort of her floor. A larger share went against Trump, distributed across other candidates if you count those early states. Then the news gets worse for Trump when you look at where he's bleeding out. Because any Republican nominee can be fine in safe red states like Texas, can afford to even lose a few points over any reason and still win. Any generic Republican wins Texas. But Haley showed Trump's largest problems in his party are in the states that he actually would need to win back for a November victory, like Colorado, or states he needs to hold on to, like North Carolina, and the places with more independents who often can define general elections. Another problem for Trump, because Haley won 40% in New Hampshire, 35% in Virginia. Historically, you need United Party support to win these states. And historically, Republican candidates who have rebounded from divided primaries often did so by forging a team, be it on the ticket or through endorsements that healed primary cracks. Now, Trump aides know what he may be loath to admit today. The candidate who he did beat last night, and that was a big headline, Nikki Haley, could actually have more sway over his election chances than many other factors, including what he says and what he posts online, all the things that may occupy his time. He may not like that, but that is one of the iron laws of divided primaries that history shows. Not a prediction, but more of an observation from the past. Now, if what I showed you briefly there, the Bush-Reagan reunion where they decided to make up and campaign together, if she joined him and made a strong pitch to her voters, who are this sizable group in some key places, that could matter a lot. And that may depend on what he does and what she concludes about this race. We heard a little bit from her today. As for those Haley voters, here's what some of them are saying now.
If it ends up being Trump or Biden, how do you think you'll vote in 2024?
You know, that's a really good question. It's probably going to be Biden just because it's been, 4 years and he hasn't divided.
So if she doesn't end up winning the primary and getting the electoral vote,
right,
would you vote for Donald Trump in November?
I'm not sure. I don't know what to do.
Sounds pretty straightforward, pretty honest. Those are people, those are examples, but those are people in the street, as we say, people in the street interviews where Nikki Haley, what she says and does in these weeks and months ahead could matter a lot to them. So we hear a lot from Washington. We got a lot of lectures about how hot Ron DeSantis would be or how things would go down. And turns out we have to do something pretty traditional sometimes, even in this cacophony of all of this polarization and new technology and new stuff. Sometimes in a democracy, you have to just buckle up, pay attention, listen to the voters. And there's plenty to be depressed about in America. I'm not going to sugarcoat any of that for you here on the news, but it is interesting and perhaps hopeful to see some change, some premises smashed, some barriers broken, and the voters telling a story that at least is more nuanced, more rich, more thoughtful than some of what we were lectured about from the pundits earlier in this cycle.
If it makes you feel any better, I have already put evac on alert. He's ready to go if it comes to that. General, I can assure you.
Hey, General, let me into the war room to see you, so I had to hack my way onto this frequency.
This better be critical, Wheelie.
Sir, come on, what is it now, please? Okay, couple of things. I'm running low on the dough. I was thinking about taking a couple of months sick leave, maybe starting today. And, oh yeah. I intercepted a transmission from Megatron.
Then send it through.
Yes, sir, right away, sir. And so I'll assume that we're good on the other stuff.
This is your last warning, insects. Relinquish what remains of the Allspark.
So who's the insect? You? What? Who's the insect?
Protect you. They were defeated on our world, and we will defeat them here.
This was just a diversion. Security, please bring up. Rabbit, she's already inside. Deeds! Give me an update on that reserve. Boss readiness. What was his name? What was it?
Evac, sir.
Right, evac.
She's right in front.
We are facing a heavy sustained attack. They appear to be after the Allspark. General! General! We need this evac immediately. Evac immediately.